So the topic of my presentation is the French lieutenant's woman narrative style. The French Lieutenant's Woman is a novel by John Fowles published in 1969. It tells a story that is set some 100 years earlier in the Victorian age. Therefore, Fowles imitates the Victorian style of writing to a certain extent, but due to the influence of the spirit of his time, he also incorporates many elements of modernist and postmodern writing, thereby providing a new perspective on that era. Some of those elements which are prominent in the novel are an emphasis on one's freedom and individuality rather than submission to society, intertextuality, pastiche, fragmentation, an open-ending metafiction, historiographic metafiction, and parody. For the most part, this novel is told from the third-person perspective, characteristic of Victorian novels. First and second-person perspectives are also used in some parts of the book, which are metafictional in nature. However, unlike Victorian narrators, the narrator of this novel is not omniscient, although he initially keeps up the appearances of being so. He is also somewhat unreliable, which is evident from his admitted lack of knowledge in certain cases. More importantly, at times he even deceives the reader by providing false information or withholding information. In addition, he departs from Victorian literary conventions by making frequent intrusions into the narrative to make his personal comments on the matter at hand, including different features of the Victorian era. Naturally, those comments are usually made from the 20th century perspective. It is also worth mentioning that the narrator's persona appears in the novel on two occasions as a side character, which we will talk about later. Apart from reproducing various characteristics of the Victorian age in the body of the novel itself, Fowles also evokes the Victorian atmosphere through the use of epigraphs, which are in most cases quotations from literary and historical Victorian sources that reflect the events in the novel. In this presentation, we are going to focus on the metafictional elements of this novel, and the comments on the authorial process Fowles makes in two places. Metafiction refers to fictional works which draw the audience's attention to the fact that they are reading precisely that, a work of fiction, thereby preventing them from becoming too engrossed in the story and mistaking it for reality. The most prominent example of that in The French Lieutenant's Woman can be found in chapter 13, where Fowles makes a digression from the main plot to make a number of important statements with regard to his approach to the writing of this novel. Chapter 12 ends with two questions about Sarah. In the next chapter, Fowles says frankly that he doesn't know the answer to those questions, adding later on that there are modern women like Sarah, and that he never understood them. He clearly states that this story is imaginary, and that the only reason he pretended to know everything about his characters is that the convention of the Victorian age was, quote, that the novelist stands next to God, end quote. However, since he lives in the age of Roland Barthes and Alain Robbe-Grillet, Such novel cannot be called a novel in the modern sense of the word. As it will become clear from the rest of this section, Fowles here actually hints that his novel will at least partly conform to the views of the aforementioned French literary theorists. He refuses to enter Sarah's mind because he knows that in the imaginary world he created, she would not reveal her thoughts. Therefore, although it is possible for him to do so, he deems such an act impermissible. The following excerpts from the novel explain the reasoning behind that in more detail. So the first excerpt goes like this. We, meaning novelists, wish to create worlds as real as, but other than the world that is, or was. This is why we cannot plan. We know a world is an organism, not a machine. We also know that a genuinely created world must be independent of its creator. A planned world, a world that fully reveals its planning, is a dead world. It is only when our characters and events begin to disobey us that they begin to live. Next excerpt. In other words, to be free myself, I must give him, Charles, and Tina, and Sarah, even the abominable Mrs. Pulteney, their freedom as well. There is only one good definition of God, the freedom that allows other freedoms to exist, and I must conform to that definition. And the last excerpt. The novelist is still a god, since he creates, and not even the most aleatory avant-garde modern novel has managed to extirpate its author completely. What has changed is that we are no longer the gods of the Victorian image, omniscient and decreeing, but in the new theological image, with freedom our first principle, not authority. As I said, the narrator's persona appears twice in the novel, in chapters 55 and 61. We will say a few words about his first appearance, since it is much more significant in all respects. Having broken his engagement, Charles gets on a train to Exeter and meets a bearded middle-aged man. The narrator doesn't immediately reveal that that is his persona, but only after some time. What follows is the narrator's rumination on what to do with Charles while the latter is asleep. In summary, he says that it is clear what Charles wants, but that is not the case with Sarah, whose whereabouts are supposedly unknown to him if he is to be believed at all. Upon due consideration, the narrator decides not to fix the fight between their wishes in anyone's favor, but to present two alternative endings, knowing well that whichever ending comes last will be considered the true, definite one. He tosses a coin to determine their order of appearance. Having dismissed the Victorian ending presented in chapter 44, in which Charles marries Ernestina, Fowles again departs from Victorian conventions by providing two possible endings to this novel, the first of which can be considered semi-Victorian, because Charles and Sarah reunite, while the other one, in which they go their separate ways, is typical of postmodernism. By offering his readers the liberty to choose the ending they prefer, Fowles goes a step further than Bath, who maintained that readers should engage with the text, insofar as he forces the readers to be active, not only in the matter of deciding how the novel should end, but also in order to make sense of the fragmented narration, which is difficult to do if one reads passively. In conclusion, although Faust includes many Victorian elements in the narration of the French lieutenant's woman, so as to make it more authentic, its narrative style is distinctly postmodern in nature. This novel is more of a commentary on the Victorian era from a postmodern perspective than a work of historical fiction attempting to faithfully reproduce the literary style of that age. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I hope you liked it.